I'm going to do some more verses from part of last week's songs for the last time we met. Start off by reminding you that I am not here inveighing against the common man, but I'm going to pick up some of that from last time and use that description again. Start off and remind you again that throughout history, would-be poets, mystics, religious people, social commentators, and your Uncle Charlie are prone in fits at some time, I don't know, drinking or something. This seems to come upon people that they begin to want to rhapsodize about the common man. Now, you people know that I'm not talking about that. And what I have to say is no attack upon the reality of man and his diverse purposes in life. But I'm using this description, and I'm using the common man term somewhat synonymously with me talking about people, the people, me talking about those living in the city as opposed to the would-be revolutionists lurking about in the oily bushes. Now, the common man is not individually, from our view, from the revolutionary view, from a view of change, an abrupt kind of change within 60 years. The common man is not individually good, bad, or even necessarily relevant. He is, to partially steal some old religious ideas and to twist them out of shape, he is, in a sense, a physical plane of battle, a field of sport. It is a place of a specific kind. We're getting, of course, a little close to the secret, but he is a kind of physical playing field, a kind of physical place in which the triaxial games, the wars that is the growth of life, takes place through man. Within the city where the common man lives, there is available no new data. Never, ever. In the city is never new information. In the city is never any procedures for fresh behavior. The actions of the common man, the thinking of actions of the common man, are always based on, they're always limited to, old and present, which are the same thing, concepts. If it were otherwise, he would not be the common man. This is no sort of flamboyant theory. Just take anybody, now let's forget about us speaking in any extraordinary sense. Anyone who is not part of the common man, people who are judged to be emotionally or intellectually dangerous, they are not part of the common man because they are not operating on the basis of old or current precepts. The data that they seem to be operating upon with their behavior does not fit into the mold of the common man. And therefore, something must be done about them. Same way, well, it seems to be those who are dangerous in a civil or a criminal sense to society. They're locked up in prisons. There is this great mainstream, there is this common man dynamic that must be maintained. It is what supports the city, it is what supports the apparent ruling powers both internally and externally in the individual and in humanity as a whole. It is through this main channel. It is not through the side tributaries. It is not through little offshoots. It's not through swamps and savannas. It's through this great central river that the main energies flow. Not energy, energies. All of them. And that is the common man. That is what you cannot be. That is what the common men sing their own praises of. Hooray for us. They have to. in the sense that the common man, the people with a capital T and capital P, the people, noting them as a kind of battlefield, as a playing field, even as a river channel. Part of their purpose is to sustain and to indiscriminately reflect all three forces. That is what makes the common man common. That is what makes ordinary people ordinary. That's what makes the people the people. That is what would make you you if that was the only choice we had. That you could cry forever, I couldn't help myself. The devil made me do it. My genes made me do it. My lower circuits made me do it. Tiredness made me do it. Anything you want to say. You are indiscriminately reflecting the continual actions and necessary actions of all three forces. You are then part of the common man. You are the living celebration of the common man. And you are doing nothing unusual. I don't care if you're sitting here. I don't care if you were within eyesight of me. But in this situation, the common man, sustaining and continually indiscriminately reflecting the reality of the three forces, this condition results in the fact that the common man can never comprehend where he or she might be in the scheme of things. They can never comprehend where they might be, and they can never comprehend what the purpose might be. To do so, you would have to be able to continue with this 3D folly. You would have to be able to ascertain where you were, and then you would have to be able to align yourself. You would have to be able to claim and to enforce some allegiance to one of the forces. And it would have to be in particular. Without this ability to plot where you are, without the ability to recognize that you've got a purpose, which you're getting awfully close to the secret, then you continually, as I said, you reflect an indiscriminate view of the three forces at work. It is for that reason that everyone says, perhaps some of you do not believe that you say it that much anymore, but that everyone says, boy, am I a mess. It is for that reason that psychologies, would-be mystical philosophies, can so easily come up with these picturizations and these ideas that man, starting from further back in the horizontal past, that man is peopled by many spirits, and that he is indeed a living battlefield between these good spirits and these bad spirits, between these good personalities, these profitable personalities, and these self-destructive personalities. That man is a multitude of little individual sins and inclinations. It is for the reason that he is an indiscriminate reflection of the eternal triaxial dance, is that a man feels as though I am coming apart, or I was born coming apart. The belief that in some way I have been driven from a homeland, that at one time, in everyone's genes, to varying degrees, it at least hits their thinking of action, people throughout the world believe that they can almost remember a time that I sort of had myself pulled together, or that I was sort of together. But now it seems like, at least since if not the 7th grade, maybe the 2nd grade, and if not then kindergarten, if not then, right there in the delivery room in the hospital, sometime between here and there, things began, it appears, thinking back on it, it seems that things began to get a little shaky. And of course, those wired up to be religious blame it upon your forefathers' offenses to the gods. And the psychologically inclined blame it on their parents. Also, those who believe that they are attracted to or involved with some sort of mystical activity or some mystical quest, they believe, explaining it in diverse ways, they do believe that in some way this is to take all these little factions that seem to live in you, all of these little ambivalent feelings, all these conflicting opinions, and in some way a mystical experience, some sort of extraordinary awakening or development, would take all of this and through some kind of cosmic pressure would create a diamond out of a lump of coal, whereas nobody but John Anderson or Billy Joe Shavers believes that kind of shit. Diamonds are not made out of coal, unless you're going to say, as Kyroots pointed out to you last week, that it can be stated with assurance that there are molecules, but beyond that it's mostly speculation. So coal and diamonds are molecules. You and the Pope are molecules. Your belief that there's life after death and your belief that when you die is just a big old state of boredom worse than this, all of that's molecules. But the idea that in some way I am going to be transformed, that the materials of which I am apprised now, me and all of my subhuman glory, is going to in some way be brought together, and from this will be produced some great new being, is mistaken. It is not possible even mathematically in the 3D world. It is not possible on a particle basis in the 3D world. It cannot be done unless you knew how to rewind 3D time. It cannot be done. What you are left with is what I have tried to sketch for you, to map for you, to paint and sing for you, that there is something else possible. But you've got to get beyond the belief that I am tied to the past, that everything I do is based upon the past. If I can change, it's on the basis that I, me, Fred or Mary, are going to change, or I'm going to change the Fred and Mary that I am. Only common people believe that, as they must. That's the only reason that common people can continue to be wired up and go to church, for instance, to any sort of religious organization wherein the promise of delivery of services is all that's necessary. And the delivery is never necessary. That join the church and you'll feel better. Nobody really feels better. Join the church and you'll change. Nobody changes really. And of course the great one, join the church and when you die, you don't die. Great, what a relief. It's the ultimate non-delivery of service. The churches, the religions, God bless them, so to speak, not one of them can bring forth a spokesman. They can't even do as good as they do on TV now to bring out somebody to come out and say, I'm not a dead person, although I play one on TV or something. Not one religion can bring forth a person who can say that the ultimate promise of this religion, that is that when you die, you don't die, they delivered the service. Not once have they brought such a person, not even their founder. If one of them I can think of that starts with a C, they couldn't even bring the founder out. They said he did, but you've got to admit, it was the people that turned into the franchisees of that particular business are the only ones that said they saw the guy. At any rate, the delivery of the services is not the point. It has never been the point for the common people. And the service that people believe would be delivered, to use a kind of not unfair description I'm giving you, that is that they, as they are, will be transformed. All the religions believe that. They may use terms like a new man, a new birth, but what they're saying is these poor, mortal parts of me, whatever they want to call them, body, mind, soul, spirit, and everything, that in some way, if I can get in the right position with the God of our religion, or with its rituals, or its beliefs, that I will be transformed out of the material I am now. That delivery has never come forward. It is simply the promise of services to be delivered. Now, what the would-be revolutionist, what you people have got to understand is, what I've tried to trick you into, what I've gotten enough of you close enough that you have real distinct glimpses of it, without it getting overly mystical and without me painting any strange pictures for you, any more now than I ever have. It is a real change, but in a sense it is irrelevant to what you seem to have been. It is like an overdrive is taken over. And it is not that you necessarily undergo some imagined or some real or some dreamed of transfiguration so that you look that much different or you walk that much different. Not that there might not be some observable change. You might not be able to help some of it, or it might not even be profitable to try and help some of it. But it is given the 3D limit of verbalization, although this is imperfect, but given the imperfections and limits of words, I've got to tell you, it is not a change based upon what you were. It's just a little old bitty change. I've admitted that. I mean, real teeny, which I threw out last week. I thought maybe some of you would enjoy it. They really thought you had changed a lot. But once you see it, once you can realize it, just the teeniest change is a lifetime of change. To finally, before you die, find yourself, and only you can really know this. Well, when it happens, as I am wont to say at times, you might want to look me up and go, ooh, ooh, oh, ooh, ooh, ah, ooh. You'll make some kind of signals, and maybe I'll go, yeah. Well, what I'm telling you is, in a sense, only you experience the change, because it is not a show. It is not that you're going to be overcome to suddenly shave your head and to paint a big J on your head or to dress in a certain way. It is that you're going to realize that in a sense I have genetically, I can feel it. I am not the same person. And yet you could not prove it. You don't want to. But by then, some of my maps and words should come back to you, and you realize, in a sense, the four-dimensional humor of all this. That you could not prove that you had changed. If you picked out a person that you, maybe suddenly you thought about your dear mother, your father, or somebody that you used to have philosophical discussions with in college, and you'd love to run and get them and say, I want to tell you, I know that you kind of laughed and sneered about me hanging around these groups all these years. It's paid off. There's been a change in me that's beyond any description, and you cannot prove it. I mean it all. There's nowhere to start. Because by then you would not be a crude sort. You would know better than this, for instance. I'll go ahead and say it. You would not go to your mother or father or best friend in the past and say, you want to tell you how much I've changed? You remember, for 40 years I smoked 5 packs of cigarettes a day, or I used to drink a fifth of bourbon every day for the last 30 years. You remember that? And they go, oh yeah. You say, stop just like that, and just forget all about it. Big deal. You would know that that's no change, that's no proof of change. You would not even say that. I simply bring up the example in case your own yellow circuits are trying to jump somewhere and think, well, if it was some kind of real dramatic change, if I wanted to, I in some way could make somebody see it. If there was some way you could make a common person see the change, you blew it. All you did was change underwear. You got a hairstyle. You may have taken a drastic step backwards. You cannot prove that you have changed. Now, there's no profit in me going much further with this verbally. It is a solitary, other than, as I said, you might want to look me up. It is a solitary experience in a sense. And the reality of it is that it cannot be proven. The reality of it is that it is not an alteration of your prior self. It is a real, in a sense, apparently, self-induced mutation of yourself genetically. I'm not sure I'd write that down. It's either that or a gift of the guides. I don't know. But back to one place where I was painting a little again. As long as you are the people, that is, that you're apparently the state that I have described before, you are the people. You are born being the people. And forget all this stuff about spirits and different personalities. They're all reflections, or crude reflections of something, but look at it for the time being, as I've been describing in my revolutionary jargon, that the people are there, and you were born the people. And within the state, to be the ruling powers. That's what people ordinarily, Fred and Mary, call I. Just in general, that's the ruling powers. You can't always tell whether there's the same king sitting on the throne every day. Sometimes there may be 2 or 3 different kings. They seem to play games, or one may have gotten overthrown sometimes during puberty. One of them may have gotten overthrown apparently, or maybe his brother-in-law took over. It's hard to tell. Back when your wife died, your husband died, your mother died. But there is a sense, without any doubt, or else you would have been locked up by the people themselves. There is a sense that there is a ruling power in you, the ruling powers. And you think of it generally as being you, as being Fred or Mary. You were born with this condition. This is an expansion, as you might see, of the partnership. But you were born, and you are the people. You have a myriad of opinions, feelings, beliefs, oftentimes contradictory, but what else is new with the people, with a city? As long as that is all you are, which is by and large all that life demands of anybody, as long as that is all you are, not in a religious sense, of course, but you are likened to a kind of battlefield, or a playing field, or a great channel of a river. Each person is, and humanity as a whole is, but an individual on that basis cannot in any way align himself with any particular force. He cannot even identify where he is. He is simply a molecule in the billions and billions and gallons of water flowing. Read People if you want to. He is simply a player there in this great game going on. And it's just a matter of happenstance whether you were born with enough of so-called ego that you believe that somebody somewhere pays any particular attention to the number on your back. Many people can't even figure out if they have a number. A face in the crowd. On that basis, you're never able to ascertain where you might be. You're never able to ascertain if there is any purpose to this. You cannot align yourself with any force. Having said that for the 3rd time, I am not right now insinuating or trying to point toward aligning yourself with some great pseudo-mystical force. It is that you just cannot find what to do in life. And then beyond that would be if you were trying to do something extraordinary, which is why you continue to deal with me in what I'm doing. It's trying to align yourself in some way that there was no direction for this, there was no data for this, that you could find anywhere else. But on the basis that you cannot identify where you are, you cannot ascertain if there's any purpose, you cannot align yourself with any particular force, you are caught in the middle of the battlefield in no man's land, or you can look at yourself as being part of the battlefield, wherein there is a continual interplay of all 3 forces, and it's like you're getting shot at from all 3 sides. Or it is like you are a bullet that is continually being fired from 3 guns at once. And every time you think, I believe I'll go here, before you can think it, it's like, well, I believe I'll go here, and then I'll go here. Or you can look at it this way, you were fired once out of your mother's womb, and you have been involved in an indiscriminate, non-stop act of ricocheting ever since. and there is no way to ascertain where am I going. I wish I knew which gun I came out of. Or could I get back in it and have another shot at this? Could I be reborn? Could I come back inside of another gun, inside of a C gun? I think I came out of a D gun. No, an E gun, a C gun, D gun. This condition is what necessitates the need for a revolution. Another something. As far as the would-be recruit, the would-be revolutionist is concerned, there's the matter of sacrifice. In the last 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, I've mentioned several things about possessions, and we'll assume that no one believed that I was limiting what I said in any manner to some material attack, even commentary on possessions. And I mentioned to you that something would be wrong with a revolutionist that even kept possessions once he realized that they either were not, any particular one was either not attractive or not useful. The whole scenario that I have played around and sketched on and tap danced on the edge of for the last few weeks had to do, it would sound like, with sacrifice, with trying to ascertain what is necessary, what is useful, what is, and part of the necessity should be that which is attractive, that which pleases me. But a little more I wanted to say about what appears to be sacrifice. All religions talk about sacrifice. Even atheists talk about sacrifice. Even your uncle used to talk about sacrifice. And God knows, I'm sure you talked about sacrifice before I met you. But for the recruit, the correct concept of sacrifice is not money. It has nothing to do with blood and throwing virgins into pits. I got a lot better things that, well, never. Or giving up one's life. No. The correct sacrifice would be to sacrifice one's commonness. That's the correct sacrifice. That, if you get a proper glimpse of it, swallows, is the living definition of, what's the word? Esurient. Esuriency. It encompasses all possible pertinent sacrifice. It's to give up your commonness. It would be to relinquish the comfortable and desirable, but also it would be to relinquish the irritating and the repealing. The ordinary, the common people believe that there'd be one thing to be sacrificed. To take it at its, of course, crudest level is what I was trying to cover by mentioning those things that would not be of money and blood and virgins and your life, because all of that comes from a 1D view that all religions. And it's still true in people today. The Catholic Church, or as far as I know, there are no temples still involved with blood sacrifices. But in the Christian Judaic tradition, they still speak fairly highly of it. It was worthwhile. In fact, we still might should be doing it. Animals, if not humans. Money. And of course, be prepared to give your life. But all of that is a 1D view. If I was really big-hearted, which I'm not, I could say it's a 2D view. But it's a 1D view, that is, that there are particular things to do, to sacrifice. To sacrifice commonness would not be going one direction. You would not sacrifice that which I like. You would likewise have to sacrifice simultaneously that which I do not like. And this is all the way it appears. That I apparently like so-and-so. I apparently like having a couple of good belts after work every day. Therefore, I will sacrifice it. But if you do that, you haven't done anything. You got to sacrifice doing it, then you got to sacrifice any resistance you have to doing it. It's got to become a non-event, or else you become what? I've become a non-belter. I have given up belting. I have, however, I'm glad you'll be delighted to know, I have taken up talking about it. Would you step over here and let me tell you about it? Bring your drink with you. And everybody says, I got to go, I've just realized it. That is not a sacrifice. You have not given up anything. You are still playing in an apparently closed system. And that if you stop one thing, yeah, I quit smoking and gained 275,000 pounds. Plus, no one will speak to me anymore because I cannot stop talking about it. Or yes, I have become a born-again Christian. I have given up all of my friends and family. No one will associate with me anymore. That is not a sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice do you call it to go and throw something you own in the fiery pit there at the temple, there at the church, and they give you a credit slip? Ordinary people, when they believe that they have changed, they of course give themselves a credit slip. Part of the credit slip is I can now talk about my change, as they would call it. I'm pointing out it's an alteration. It's a swap. It's one habit for another. It's balancing one pattern of molecular behavior, chemical flows, for another one. And of course, you didn't actually do it, but to give you little doubles the best of your due, that's the closest that you could describe it as anything actually having taken place. To sacrifice something, you have got to sacrifice apparently what it is that you're describing. Some habit you have, some inclination, as most people want to say, some weakness I have, some shortcoming, some error of continual errors that I make, I'm going to sacrifice it. But to sacrifice it, you've got to sacrifice, to jump into at least a 2D world, you have got to sacrifice apparently that which you're going to swap it for. That is, it's apparent opposite. You've got to swap, you've got to abandon, you've got to sacrifice that which apparently made you want to give it up. Then if we're going to get into the 3D world, you've got to sacrifice both of those. And the first proof of that, as I continue to come back to, is you have to treat this apparent change as though you knocked on its door, and when the two little changes, the change that wanted to happen, and then the part that didn't want to change, and says, who's there? You had to say, the Boston Strangler. Let me in. It is, in toto, as I started out this paragraph, it is the sacrifice of one's commonness. Truly, you should see that by now. Would it not be uncommon for you to be able to give up, not just pick out periodically habits that are quite visible, smoking, drinking, overeating, whatever it is, but pick your own. Pick those that would apparently be even closer to some great, I guess as some people would think, of some great cosmic or spiritual significance. How uncommon would it be if you could actually change something you do that you think, you don't have to defend it, but something that you think, something that you feel is of real significance? How uncommon would it be to actually do it and never ever mention it to anybody? Now that's uncommon enough. Or of course, to tell you the truth, for an ordinary person, it is fucking possible. They can't do it. You should know that. They cannot do it. They would die. They would explode. They would implode. They would fall into a terminal anti-mellow state. They would go directly from here, near the speed of light, past chill out, to molecules frozen. That is not possible. So now let's go beyond the ordinary people. That they could not refrain from telling somebody. All right, now take the impossible, or technically speaking, the fucking possible, and at least cube it. And then you've got somebody who apparently changed something in them and did not tell themselves. If there are any of you that believe that there are a handful of people, much less 12 or 144 or something, number of people on this planet at any time, like right now, that can do that, then for you people, I do want to point out that maybe I did exaggerate a couple of years ago when I told you that Santa Claus was killed on the Jersey Turnpike. All you got to do, you've got the genes in you, you have got the noise of your own DNA. Those of you who know how, you can even play with a kind of attempted neuralizing, and you should be able to feel within yourself that if some drastic change happened to me, or maybe pick out one to you that you can verbalize that to you would be a real payoff for this. If that happened, is in some way, is it true that in some way I could not even tell myself that this had happened? Now there's only a handful of you, not to make anybody and the rest of you feel bad, but there's only a handful of you that on a real good month can get a feel for that just for a few seconds. It's beyond being logical or illogical. You can't really get your yellow circuit hands on it. That how could something happen and me not talk about it? Because the only way you can really look at it now, or the only way you can try and neuralize it, and it still is going to start making yellow circuit noises, is that it almost sounds like it would happen and in some way I would not be aware of it. That I would refuse to be conscious of it. Now that's way off the mark, but that's closer than you ever heard yourself say. It's just illogical, it's unreasonable, impossible. But other than that, it's better than any religion's vade mecum. It's better than any philosophical idea that you believe you ever had. The sacrifice of one's commonness, I could say verbally, would wrap itself up in you sacrificing everything that is familiar, being prepared to sacrifice everything in you and in your life that is reassuring. Another way that you could put it is you are sacrificing all that is natural and almost inevitable, and you have got to sacrifice it. That sounds easy to say, and many of you have circuits, many of you have little nervous systems that can hear such as that either from me or something similar. I guess you could read somewhere and go, hey, now we're talking. That's the kind of thing, as soon as I'm confronted, as soon as the cosmic forces arrange themselves in such a way that I'm confronted by this great possibility of jumping into some psychological black hole, that I can spiritually jump between the cracks, is this poor imitation of reality begins to shift and groan and moan, and the gears are all whining, that I'll in some way find a place to jump in there, and I'll realize it right before I do it, that, hey, this is my great cosmic opportunity. The gods have finally arranged things instead of all these low-level pissant tests that they give and all the ways that I keep getting irritated in life. Here's the big chance to be extremely irritated, but I know that if I can just hold out here just for a few seconds and brave it through like a real little trooper, that the gods are going to go, aw, aw, okay, ignite him, light that man up. Fix him right up. Bring him home with us. Bring him home with the gods and Oral Roberts, and Buddha, and the rest of it. That was a nice dream, and there are all kinds of nice books, and it's nice. I know it's nice to sit around and read such things with your feet propped up and drinking coffee and believing that's the way it's going to work. Well, let me tell you this. Whatever you do, don't you ever take a ride from a man in a red suit when you're on the Jersey Turnpike. what you're imagining, the dreams of that kind of sacrifice, does not have to do with the inevitable. The inevitable is so far away, it is so exotic, occult, mystical, otherworldly, that it's everything that happens to you. That's how weird it is. That's what people are blind to. That is the way people live in each other's face. That's how you live in life's face, and you cannot see what's going on. And you want to sit home, you and everybody, and you want to sit home, or if that sounds too passive, you want to get out and even walk in the rain. You'll go that far. Maybe jog when you have a slight head cold. Something really sacrificial. And you're waiting for something extreme to happen, such as that you are actually jogging, maybe a combination, with a slight head cold and a slight drizzle. And suddenly when you get through that rather deserted strip where you run for about a quarter of a mile, that this huge voice, like a Thurber cartoon, a face or a voice, is going to come out of the woods and say, hey, you finally made the extreme sacrifice. Or enough of those small ones paid off, and here it goes, kid, zap, you got it. That is not inevitable. Trust me. I'm going to tell you what's inevitable. What's inevitable is it's going to drizzle. What's inevitable is that you're going to have a head cold. The natural, the inevitable, is what's been happening to you all your life. The inevitable, that which the common people wallow in, that which is the definition of the common man, is he takes the inevitable. And that's it. The inevitable is what has always happened to you. The inevitable is that which, if you do not use it, you'll never change. Only those hear the voice of God who believe someday they're going to hear the voice of God. If you believe you're going to hear the voice of God, if you believe there's going to be some extraordinary, some personal, extraordinary, when I say extraordinary, I mean metaphysical, unbelievable occurrence going to happen to you that's going to be the momentary opening of the great door to the great secret. And it's going to be so extraordinary that it's just going to be no doubt about it. If that's what you're waiting on the voice of God, or Allah, your Father. You're not waiting on the inevitable. The inevitable is what happens to you. The inevitable is what has already happened to you. The inevitable is what's happening to you right now. If you cannot sacrifice that is, learn from it. Sacrifice what happens, sacrifice your immediate reaction, your automatic reaction to it, nothing will ever happen. Except you will be, by and large, off and on, entertained by me as long as I keep this up. I conclude this paragraph by reminding you again, the real sacrifice is in the sacrifice of your commonness. It is in your sacrifice of everything that is comfortable, everything that is irritating, everything that is reassuring, everything that is frightening. It is the sacrifice, of course it appears to be, for those of you really sticklers for words. If so, you should be on the Massachusetts State Police Bureau. That it would appear, though, that you have to be prepared to sacrifice, if that's the way you want it. But I intend, before this tape is over, to shoot that as full of as many holes as you know what. But apparently be prepared to sacrifice everything in you that apparently is natural, that is comfortable. And the real wrap-up is to be able to sacrifice that which is inevitable. Not to try to escape from it, not to try and, not through behavior necessarily, or limited to behavior, the action of escape, but also the thinking of action that I do not deserve this. I should find a way to escape. It was somebody else's fault. I was unprepared. They caught me on a bad day. I was set up. I was framed. Who but a common man would say such things? All right, wrap up number 3 to this paragraph. Another way that I could phrase this, that you could say that the ultimate stumbling block to becoming a real revolutionist is in just momentarily, even just once, but just momentarily letting what would seem to be mechanical pleasure swamp the cause. To be able to just at one time be there in the bushes, and instead of being able to hold on, wherever it came from, however you ended up here, whatever seems to motivate you, I don't even have time to discuss it. But there you are, and you are apparently committed to the revolution, to the cause. And one time, momentarily, there it is raining again, and there you are in the bushes. There you are apparently separate from the warmth, the companionship of the people in the city. And one time you get swamped. Just momentarily, you curse the revolution. Momentarily, you curse yourself for being involved with it. Momentarily, you seek a dry place other than to fulfill whatever duty. You had guard duty for that night, for an hour, for a minute, for a second. And you stepped away from the spot just momentarily to get under a tree because it's been raining on you for what? A week? A year? 5 years? Jesus. Just once. That is the biggest stumbling block. And I don't bring this up, and I didn't retell that old story last time about the gates of paradise, you remember, opening. And after years and years, or hundreds or thousands of years of this guy waiting, and just the one time he just dozed off for a second, and the gate opened and closed. That's not to be pessimistic. That's the ordinary use of such stories. But it does show, for the common man, the almost inevitable reality of the impossibility of any change, that genes will out, molecules will tell. The common man does prevail, and in the end, almost everybody on this planet at all times goes to their grave being a celebration of the common man. Whether they wanted to, whether they said they wanted to, that's what they are. Let's turn the tape. Everybody should, by now, see, or you should be able to strongly suspect that real change, undeniable, feelable change is only possible through the kind of junctures of emotional trial, pressure, that seems inevitable to everybody's life, and it is not coming from, it is not arising from pleasant interludes in one's life. It is not. Now everyone in here, everyone who hears this tape somewhere else and some other time, that after your exposure and or involvement with this, that there seems to have been with you some real change, something that was enough that you knew that this is what you were looking for, that you knew that I am on the right track more or less, that this is really the kind of food I was wanting. All right, whatever it was, if you tried not to look back, no matter how small it seemed to have been, if it's just a one-time occurrence thus far, if you look back, you would not in any way see that it came about or seemed to be directly following from, arising from, in conjunction with some particularly pleasurable interlude in your life. Now, it is a new definition, you could say, of pleasure once it happens. But all of you should now either see or suspect so strongly that you can all but see if it hasn't happened to you, that it is not times of ordinary pleasure, things running along in their rather middle-of-the-road stupor that seems to make it possible for someone to do anything out of the ordinary. And it does not have to be the death of your mother or father or husband or wife or child. It doesn't have to be that. But if you could see it correctly, if you could get outside the limits of simply 3D a priori vision, you would begin to realize, well, some of you do, it's not all that hard, but to clearly realize that what 3D consciousness wants to refer to as stress, pressure, bad luck, bad times, I directly can now see, I can feel from my own experience thus far, that arising from those so-called areas of bad times, trials, pressures, it is from here that I can directly always trace what has seemed to be a real change in me, something you understood. Always, 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 always. And of course from this, I might add, a poor, or speaking in the chemical sense, a piss-poor reflection of this is in all religions, all would-be religions, if there's one thing they have in common, it's what? They all talk about, hey man, you got to suffer. Not just to sing the blues, but to be a Jew, to be a Christian, to be a Muslim, to be a follower of Swami so-and-so. Now, there's one thing about it, you got to suffer. If you don't suffer, you don't please the gods. That's a kind of sacrifice. Since we're not doing animals or throwing our virgin daughters into the pit, you got to suffer. You got to, if you're going to be a good blank, you got to give up fun. You got to be prepared to suffer. Like that. The suffering, the trials, the tribulations are simply the inevitable. The would-be revolutionist learns that it is happening to you constantly. I've talked about this in different ways many, many, many times. And those of you that had enough background in certain religious, cultural areas could even believe that you'd heard it, or I'm rephrasing things, about having to suffer to please the gods or to prove your worth. And then me saying you got to give it up. You got to quit suffering. The sacrifice is to give up the inevitable common man reaction to the inevitable. That it drizzles in everybody's life. Everybody gets a head cold. Everybody's mother dies. Everybody's child dies. Everybody loses their job, etc. It is inevitable. If it's not one of those, it's another one. Also inevitable to the common man is that he sees this as either being of no consequence, no way to use it, it's just a constant irritation of being here, or else he sees each of these little irritations as being supremely irritable. Ordinary consciousness cannot sacrifice this reaction. It has nowhere to start. It has no data that would even indicate that there is another position at which you might move and see this. Thus again, you have the hearts of all the religions of promises of services to be delivered that are never delivered. I'm aware of versions that cross several religious lines of these great hymns, variations of this title that people love to sing apparently all over the world for hundreds of years, things about, oh, we take refuge in you, O Lord, you mighty fortress. Something like that. Or I take refuge from my miseries, from the trials of this life. I take refuge in the bosom of the gods. Now, if we were going to assume verbally that there is some validity to that, then I've got to point out to you that that would, if it were in and of itself three-dimensionally valid and or possible, which would be the same thing, if such a thing was possible through prayer, through signing a piece of paper, through saying, yes, I'm a Baptist, yes, I'm a Jew, yes, I'm a Catholic, and you could in some way take refuge, indicate that there is another position at which you might move and see this. Thus again, you have the hearts of all the religions of promises of services to be delivered that are never delivered. I'm aware of versions across several religious lines of these great hymns, variations of this title that people love to sing apparently all over the world for hundreds of years, things about, oh, we take refuge in you, O Lord, you mighty fortress. Something like that. Or I take refuge from my miseries, from the trials of this life. I take refuge in the bosom of the gods. Now, if we were going to assume verbally that there is some validity to that, then I've got to point out to you that that would, if it were in and of itself three-dimensionally valid and or possible, which would be the same thing, if such a thing was possible through prayer, through signing a piece of paper, through saying, yes, I'm a Baptist, yes, I'm a Jew, yes, I'm a Catholic, and you could in some way take refuge, you have constructively, literally, cut off any possibility of change. You are now a dyed-in-the-wool, city-dweller follower of some church, some religion, or if you thought you were smarter and more New Age than that, you would now be the follower of some Swami, of some somebody. And you would have constructively, even if you could not see it, even if you have trouble seeing it now, you would have constructively cut off any possibility of ever changing through the simple act, if it were possible, that I take refuge in the guides. I take refuge in my belief in the guides. I take refuge in my faith in the guides. That someday the services that my church, this religion promises will be delivered, He'll deliver. I take refuge in that belief. You have stopped any possibility of change, if there ever was any. Another way to look at the sacrifice of the real revolutionist is he would have to have no taste for, no desire for. He would have to, if there was such a thing, turn his back on, shun any ordinary idea of a refuge or some form of relief from the inevitability of life. If there was some way to get refuge from the gods, there was some way in which I could say, hey, you can take some kind of faith in me when things are, when your wife or your husband is really bugging you, or when your relationship with your family seems to be restrained anew. Just think about my smiling, holy countenance, and that I am somewhere lurking in your spiritual, well, they call it not aroma, aura, and that you can just take refuge, maybe take along a little photograph of me and chant some sort of little prayer. If there was any validity to that, and if I told you to do it, I might as well have stabbed you. A real revolutionist, if there was such a thing, and he heard about it, he would walk across the street, if not move to another city, to cut down on even the possibility that he might anytime ever want to avail himself of it. You can't. If there was any refuge, if there was any relief available, you got to abandon it, you got to sacrifice. there is no way to properly escape from hard, unexpected occurrences. I know that some of what seems to continue to happen in your life to some of you in here, it has to do with the various kinds of people attracted to this. I know that some of you feel as though the effect of some of the everyday occurrences in your life now compared to before you started this, some of it seems blunted. It seems as though there's now a kind of cushion. I understand that. There is some reality to that. But if you are actually ever going to try and ignite the revolution in yourself, you cannot passively, you cannot continually accept what may appear to be a pleasant amount of relief of some kind just by being involved with this. If you do, it's a form of suicide. It's a form of neglect that will keep you from making a kind of effort that you should be making. I know to many of you, or to some of you, it feels better. It feels easier. And if that is all you need, as I've said, you are here and you're welcome to stay here, and it serves a purpose. You serve a purpose. But the real revolutionist would abandon, if there was such a thing, he would abandon refuge. He would abandon relief. A part of being in the bushes, if you're going to stay there and learn something from it, is you should see you have got to have already abandoned it. Whether you feel as though as a recruit that was pointed out originally, you got to sacrifice everything that's familiar. This, of course, you know, as I'm not talking in just some physical manner. In the bushes, there would be several other mottos, since I seem to find mottos behind every bush. Now I've started talking about the bushes. There could be others. Last week almost got me started. But the would-be revolutionists, or at least the recruits, could say that hard times jumpstart hard people. Or you could say hard times jumpstart or ignite hard people. And a kind of corollary to that, you might remind yourself of this, that it's the common stuff that happens to the common man. And if you want a corollary to the corollary, it's who else is common stuff going to happen to? If you're a common man, common stuff's going to happen. As opposed to last time, I've saved the harder part for later in my act today. And it's this. All this was a kind of 4D oblique approach to this. That the common man, the people, ordinary consciousness, mathematically, if I ever want to confuse you people that much, through scientific notation, I would have to make up a certain form of it, but it would be mathematically correct in a 4D view. But the common man, scientifically, clinically, technically, objectively, mathematically, cannot learn from their acts. Now, I wanted to put it that way initially, and what I am referring to, of course, most people would say, learn from their mistakes. Now, you know that everybody says that. You say that. Your city is full of people, the common people. From them, if you could listen enough, continual is going on as somebody there in the city at any given time is saying, well, I'm going to learn from that mistake. We must learn from our mistakes. I do learn from my mistakes. Well, one thing about this, I'm going to learn from this. Now listen, I'm not playing with words. This is a mathematical reality. It stretches 3D consciousness. Is the only reason I bring it up, if you can get a glimpse of it. It is literally, scientifically, chemically impossible to learn from your mistake, as they're called. I'm letting that slide. If you could, you would not have been wired up to do it to begin with. Well, I didn't predict, but let's see, what I have, about 3 or 4 people heard something out of a crowd this size. It is chemically, mathematically, scientifically impossible under ordinary conditions for anybody to learn from their mistake, whatever it was that they're calling a mistake. Because if they had that potential, they would not have done it to start with. I'm talking now just mechanically, not through some great understanding, some insight. Withal, were you not genetically wired up to do this thing that you may say in thinking of action, that you may call now a mistake? You may call it a mistake every time you do it. Were you not wired up to do this, it would not be a mistake. The only way that you could not do it would have been not to have been wired up genetically to do it. It is a scientific impossibility for the common man to learn from anything he does, because everything he does, he was wired up to do. And to call it a mistake, let's go back to that, because that does mean something in life to people. This thing that a person says was a mistake I made, but I have learned from it, that is not possible. It's not simply that they're deluded. It's not that they're psychologically blind. It's impossible for an ordinary person. It's not possible when they say, well, I have learned, of course I'm including you, you're common man. For someone to say, well, I have learned, or I will learn, there's no doubt, I have just instantaneously learned from this mistake. It is impossible. The operations, the best lateral operations of your circuitry, your understanding, your yellow circuit, your mind, your personality, whatever you care to call it, operating at full blast, it is impossible for it to, quote, learn from your double quote, mistake. That is what you did. Now, as an aside, if you can, 2 or 3 of you can hear maybe right quick, really quick. As an aside, I could say, all right, they can learn one thing. They can learn, hey, I'm the sort to do that. But ordinary people don't even learn that. They're not supposed to learn that. They can't even learn that. Because they immediately, if it was pointed out, if they're wired up to take any note of it, then they immediately have to point out that, hey, this is not my fault. That is, you've got to excuse yourself. You've got to explain that this is not me. There is the chemical need to say, this is not me. This is not my fault. There was that old Latin term of post hoc ergo propter hoc. Post hoc ergo propter hoc was the old attempt, if you recall, if I'm recalling, to define fallacious logic, which meant that before is now the proof of everything that follows. If I got it right or if I got it backwards, it'd be the same thing. Was after this, following this, this is proof of everything that came before, which of course 3D in the 3D world is illogical. That would be a fair definition of the logical, of people trying to explain something right now and then saying, well, therefore, since this is true, then everything else is true. When the inference being in 3D philosophy and logic is that the original statement, whether it be apparently true or false, cannot prove something if you just suddenly decided, well, this is true. And since this is true, that is, since I know what I'm doing, then all these mistakes I've been making, they weren't mistakes. Since I've now identified that I didn't do it, then somebody else did it. It's not my fault. All my life I've been surrounded by this kind of incompetence, fifth column operations. But let me point out, if any of you are still with me, I was going to stretch this somewhere else. Forget about the Latin and the logic if you have to. I assume that you heard a little of it. I was wanting to stretch what would appear to be the confines of placing blame or to find a linear consequence of how I might make mistakes, and then how I find out that there's some way to learn from it and to use this when I told you it's impossible. And an ordinary person, scientifically speaking, could not learn from anything they've done. If you could actually learn from what was called a mistake, you would have to stretch, you would have to get beyond what seems to be the perception of the 3D world. It's going to sound worse, but I'm going to do it simply. You would have to know the mistake before it occurred in the 3D world. You would have to learn from it before the little booger ever existed. Now, this is not, quote, knowledge of oneself. You would have to go through and pass what seems to be the world of 3D logic, the flow of apparent time. I'm going to try one more time with this sort of thing. I'll use even a few gestures. And this is not the extent of it, but what seems to be the linear aspect of time. And I just want to do this quick because I'm not trying to draw you into some world of science fiction. For me to try and talk about from another view, from a more complex view of what seems to be time, and me pointing out that in you, on this planet, in the body of life itself, in the body of mankind itself, that times exist simultaneously. That the lower circuits, operations that are central around the lower circuits, my red circuits, and those that seem to be central to and based upon primarily the operations of the higher, younger circuits, it's not that one operates at the exclusion of the other in you, in mankind. It is as though if we took a sphere, the times I've tried to get some models built, and even those didn't give much of a story, it would be like a sphere in which, this is imperfect, but that pick a year, pick an hour. I guess a year would sound the simplest. And it'd be like one layer around the sphere, like an onion skin. But then it would have to go in all possible directions around the sphere, and then pick every other year that ever existed. And they would all be there, and not in a particular sequence. Oh, all right, they're in sequence. That doesn't even matter. But they're wrapped around in such a way that the so-called 3D year of 260 BC is over here somewhere, and all you have to do if you could stick your finger through there would also be 1987, would be that close to it. It would be the same way with saying that which I think as opposed to that which I do. That which seems to be the operations of my lower circuits are separated from my commitment to this, to my higher circuits. Yeah, they're separate. In a sphere, and it's worse than that, as I said, but I was trying to make something that maybe somebody would get some glimpse of. Spherically speaking, every possibility in you is that close together, no matter where you look. But 3D consciousness cannot conceive of it operating as this kind of layer upon layer and they're all that close to touching. And to say, well, what happened 2,000 years ago? Now, ordinary people, of course, you got to watch it. Ordinary people can say, well, that the past has a real influence on us. Talk's cheap. Only a few people understand what happened 2,000 years ago doesn't have a lot of, it's not a matter of it has some influence upon us psychologically or culturally. 2,000 years ago is like right behind the curtain. Because 2,000 years ago, friends, neighbors, Romans, and countrymen, is not simply lurking in an anthology of Greek philosophy. It is lurking in your genes. Somewhere 2,000 years ago, whatever now through the mutant genes called history, might say was pick out some year, 501, June the 2nd, B.C. And if there in some way it could be identified historically, that something specific that day happened that had an impact, the reverberations of which we still feel. If that were true, you do not have to look at history. If that had any reflection of a reality in the 4D world, you can feel, not think about, not read about, the reverberations going on in you. At a low level, it's in everybody, is the only reason that people remember things. It's the only reason that now, historically, that event is considered to be of some consequence. If not that event, that idea that in such and such a day or such and such year, Marcus Aurelius wrote this maxim. And people keep remembering it. They keep writing it down. They keep translating it. And you read it in a book and thought, Jesus. And you wrote it down in your little notebook. I'll remember that. That didn't happen 2,000 years ago. That happened right now. Marcus Aurelius is right around one of the spirals of your DNA. There's a piece of him in you. There's a piece of everything in you that you remember. There's a piece of everything in you that's of some use if humanity has remembered it. If the genes of humanity as a whole continue to remember that idea, that occurrence, that is either that action or that thinking of action that has happened, that is not the past. That is right now. Now, where this started, if you remember, this paragraph, is the only way that a person could learn from their mistake would be that they would have to learn before the mistake happened, apparently, in linear time. Because you cannot learn after you've done it. If you've done it, it was you. If you've done it, it was inevitable. If you've done it and say, well, that classifies in my book as a mistake, and therefore I'm going to learn from it. It's not true. It's not possible. It's not that you're weak. It's not that you're lying. It's that you're going against the laws of physics. It is not possible. You would have to learn before the mistake, before the action, which is, I was trying to give you some indication that before the action there's not some scientific mind trip that I'm trying to spring on you. If you reach a certain point, of course you'll also, if that's too weird, you'll understand what life has always meant when it made people say you need to know yourself. That is the whole secret. At the ordinary level, that's not true. If you can extend that in one direction at right angles to everything that you think would be correct about it, then you got something. Because then you'd be dealing on the basis that you could learn before you made the mistake. Then you could say, well, yeah, I've learned from my mistakes. Well, which ones? Never did them. But that is not the 3D. That is not the ordinary view of knowing oneself. The ordinary view of knowing oneself is to say, yeah, I'm full of warts. Yeah, I make mistakes time after time, but at least by God, I spent part of my life trying to operate in the philosophical mode, and I'm to the point, thank God, that I can admit my mistakes, and hopefully I've learned a bit from them. As Kant used to say, I forgot how to say hogwash in German. if you were indeed an uncommon man, if you were indeed a revolutionist, you would be one that would be of prior instruction. Because after an inevitable deed, word, thought, action is done, it's too late to correct it. And it's absolutely too late to learn from it. If you do it, you can't learn from it. I don't care what you say. I don't care what people believe. You physically, you mathematically cannot do it, that is, learn from it, if it's done. Again, I could point out that in a very strange way, these ramblings of me talking is an attempt to give prior instruction. It's an attempt to teach you stuff, to give new information that most often, at least at first hearing, does not even make sense, or if it seems to make some theoretical sense, it does not seem to be applicable to you. It may either seem too late or too early, which is actually neither, but is a kind of prior instruction. It's a kind of prior notice, but you can't tell it that way. You can't say, well, here are warnings. You can't simply say, well, now here are the rules to live by according to me and the guides. You can't do that. This brings me, I'll go ahead, thoroughly encouraged by my success thus far this evening, to, what if I call it the easier conclusion rather than saying the harder, even harder part? Does that make any difference, kid? To the seizing of power. That I mentioned last time we met. It would be here that the seizing of new power comes in, but in a very strange way verbally that I've never even mentioned before. And it will probably sound as though I am backtracking on things that I had pointed out to you. Remember last time I was talking about seizing new power, and that the real revolutionist has got to seize power anytime he can. Whatever the consequence seems to be at the time, whatever the arrangement seems to be, whatever seems to be the problem, he's got to look at it as a chance to seize new power, and you've got to grab it. You're either the grabber or you're the grabbee. Now, I'm not indulging in cute chit-chat. You'll be able to feel that by now. If you don't say hello first, you get it said to you second. And when it's said to you second, you're normally grabbed by your privates. It's not kicked there. If you do not hold out your hand and say hello, and you let the hello come from somewhere else, it does not normally reach for your hand. It reaches for parts. You become the grabbee. The seizing of new power that I mentioned comes into play in the sense that I was trying to sketch out further tonight, and that it is possible in a time frame, speaking 3D, that is almost non-existent. It comes the closest to being that non-existent now. And that in a sense you're not incorrect if you think that in some way, either philosophically or that I was literally trying to point out to you that consciousness cannot even conceive of a now. That's always apparently where I used to draw my cross, you remember. That little line that seems to be contemporaneous consciousness, and it's always splitting up that either something just happened, and by the time consciousness is aware of what happened just then, it's already in the past. And they all talk about, well, you got to live in the now, and you got to do things now that you can chemically feel. that consciousness on a good warm day, humidity not too bad, that a sense of now is really an illusion. Now, such as that I have said. Now, when I've said something, I'll admit it. Yeah. When I've said something, I'll admit it. But now I've got to tell you that the seizing of new power operates at a time that's almost non-existent. That it is almost a now. In that, this kind of new power cannot be seized from either an era to you, an era of memory, an era of the inevitable past. You cannot seize power if that seems to be the realm of consciousness that's available to you then. That is, I'm about to seize power that I have just learned from what I just did. There it went. I'm going to learn from that. You cannot seize power. You can't get anything from it if it is already to you in the past. To you. Forget theoretical discussions of how time works. If to you it's already happened, you can't seize power from it. You also cannot seize any new power if it seems to be from the thinking of action, which is the future. Of, all right, wait a minute. Now, I see what I did again. But now, next time that this circumstance happens, hey, I have learned from that. Next time, you cannot seize power from that. I point out to you the reality behind, beyond the words. Just feel right quick. You should be able to chemically feel, the good ones of you, that there has never been any satisfaction. Never. Whether you're on your knees, chanting, fasting, wearing strange hats, reading strange books, there has never been a real chemical, which is the only kind of satisfaction in you. No sense of any new strength or power, looking, thinking about, making pledges to yourself in any way about what already happened. Never, never, never. The common man usually feels worse. That's why I tell you, forget the past. Because it normally keeps, as it should be in those cases, your chemical arrangement. That is the kind of person that would think about the past right where it is. And they suffer over it. They relive it over and over. I should have said. If not, I should have said what somebody said about, well, you rat bastard, this is it. Whatever it was you keep hearing, of the phone call, your mother died. Your mother died. Whatever it was, you should be able to feel there has never been any sense whatsoever of any real new power. You did not gain anything from it. Going in what appears to be the other three-dimensional direction, you have never, even if you imagined, even if you thought that you were thinking about me, this, what I was talking about, you have never sat anywhere under any conditions and experienced a chemical feeling of any new power, any new strength, any new understanding when thinking about, well, what I'll do next time. But it is so natural. It is so natural to even, you take a note, either physically or mentally, of something I said tonight, and you believe, well, I'll go away and think about this. I'll try to even neuralize it if I knew what the hell that meant, but at least I'll go away and think about it because this feels pregnant with possibility. Or you imagine that you begin to think that you can put together some of what I've been talking about, and you imagine, boy, what would I be like if I could do what I think he's describing? If I could expand what I can apparently do sometimes to a lot of times, boy, what would that be like? It's a form of play like. Boy, what will it be like, you imagine when you're 12 years old, when I am playing for the Dodgers? What will it be like when I marry Prince Charming? What will it be like when I'm a big boy or girl? Only children, only common children, get even the sensation of any pleasure from that. And everyone is wired up for you to leave here after meeting nights at other times and to dream, to imagine what might be coming up, where this may lead, But I point out to you, you should be able to feel the validity of what I'm telling you, the correctness. You have never experienced any sensation of any new strength from that. On the contrary, once you begin to feel it correctly, it is a debilitating habit, which of course flies in the face of all three-dimensional ideas of religion and change. They believe to be a good Jew, Christian, Muslim, or whatever, that you should think about it. You should read about it. You should discuss it with your neighbors. About what it would be like if I was really a real blank. It is debilitating. It's worse than that. But it's at least you should be able to feel that you have never, ever, ever in any way benefited. You've never gained any new strength from imagining how it would be to be different. You've never gained any new strength by imagining how it would be if I was stronger. You cannot do it by reliving the past in any way. You cannot do it by imagining the future. I don't care what seems to be the context of your imagination and your thinking, and your plotting. That leaves what? Something other than over here and over there. It's almost right now. Now I say almost right now, that you've got to seize it, that whatever's happened to you. And the best time, that there's apparently some inevitable little time of pressure, bad luck, the unexpected. But if you let it pass, to enough to where it's already the past in your consciousness, even if it's just 5 minutes. Of course, those of you good enough, if it's just 5 seconds, which is about all it takes for all chemical reactions in the ordinary person. Don't anybody try and talk to the physiological departments anywhere. I don't have to get in any discussion, but it takes about 5 seconds for most people for the chemical to become absolutely electrified throughout the system. By the time that you already are now, quote, conscious, well, wait, this happened. That was 5 seconds. It's over with. You cannot seize the power. You cannot get any new power from that. You let the chemical become electrical. You let yourself talk about it. You let your nervous system make noises that you took as being a statement of what's going on. And once, of course, it's passed, you can classify it as a mistake. Oh, another faux pas on my part, a solecism, a misstep, a slight error of judgment. But I'll learn from it, and it's impossible. You certainly cannot seize any power, and you cannot seize power, just the other side, the other two-dimensional binary side of trying to learn from the past once it's gone, and that is, well, wait a minute. All right, this has happened. All right, now I see it now. Now I believe I see what happened here. I'm no fool. I'll learn from my experience. Therefore, next time I'll see this coming. That is up here on the other side of the cross, the future. I'll see this coming, and it won't happen again. In neither case can you seize any new power. You've got to do it at a point that almost does not exist. You've got to do it at a point that almost is your own creation of a non-existent now. You've got to do it before your nervous system can think about it. You've got to do it before your nervous system can take the chemical reactions, which you call emotions, to what's happened. No matter how dastardly it seemed to be, it was inevitable. No matter how defeating, no matter how negative, no matter how heart-wrenching it may have been, before it actually gets into your memory, which I'm telling you takes all of 5 seconds, before that happens, at a place that almost does not exist, you've got to seize the power. You've got to grab that son of a bitch by the throat. Then you know what being a revolutionist is. Then you know what being alone is. Then you know what fun is. You've got to grab it right then. It doesn't care what it was. Whether it was the death of your best friend, your mother, whether you heard you're about to die. Whether it seems as though I hear it coming. There's a blow coming to me emotionally right now from which I will not be able to survive. If you let it go past about 5 seconds, if you let that chemical, let's say that you are correctly feeling the future, which of course is not the future, but you're correctly feeling, uh-oh, I see what's coming. I'm glad I got my crying shoes on. Here it comes. By the time that happens, you're done for. You have got to get to a place that actually doesn't exist. It's not even arranged for the common man to deal with this. You've got to stop the inevitable right there. You have got to stop the chemicals from spreading into your consciousness. You've got to stop the predictable, the inevitable, the everyday, the mundane, the routine kinds of so-called bad luck, negative things that happen to you, and your reaction to it, and you stop it. That is the seizing of power. That is what facilitates this stuff. When I say it's a right now, yeah. By the time I can say it, by the time you can hear it, it is too late. By the time you can think about it, by the time you can ponder it, by the time you can muse it, it's too late. There is no new power, there is no new strength to be had from it. It's over with. It was just a routine flow of energy that went through you. You took it as being another burr under my saddle, another piece of bad luck, another time I've been kicked in my privates, another time I've been misused, another time that life has just been unfair to me. There's just another time that I got the blues. The energy flowed through you as it should. In the 3D world, it came and it went, and there you stand. Nothing has changed. Nothing will ever change. You can talk about the past. You can say, I'm certainly going to learn from this. But every one of you that's been involved with this for any length of time should be able to feel what I was describing, that no amount of soul searching and reflection on your past, no amount of imagination, no matter how well formed, no matter how cosmic, no matter how otherworldly it may seem, neither one of those endeavors never has ever given you any new strength. You should be able to feel the reality of that. I guess it can seem kind of depressing, like, well, what the hell am I going to think about? Because even on a bad day, when I really had the blues, at least I tried to think about you and you staying up there and some of the things you said, and I felt better. No, you didn't. Oh, all right, maybe you felt better. So the hell what? Did you get any strength from it? No. Are you thinking about the worst thing you ever did in your life? How you wish that you had not cursed your father and then he died 2 weeks later. And you keep reliving it over and over. And the ordinary man, the common man, believes, well, in some way that even just I keep reliving this and thinking about it and talking about it, some way I'm going to work it out, or it's going to make me better. It is not. And it's not moral, and it's not right or wrong. It's got nothing to do with whether you're a good boy or a bad boy. You can get no strength from that which has now become part of your memory. You cannot seize power in what to you, and you're right, don't debate this, to your perception, what seems to either be the past or the future, there is nowhere in either camp to seize power. You seize power right now, well, of course, it's too late, but it is a place that you have to invent. It is not even natural, it's not normal, and it's not necessary for the ordinary level of consciousness. The proof is that you've never lived there. Nobody has, so it's not necessary. You have to invent it. You have to force it that right now you have to seize the power of the situation. You have to seize the power available by you not being you, and you've got to seize it, and you've got at most 4.9 seconds. And it's too late. It's now part of memory. It is now throughout your nervous system. It has now been electrified. You've now thought about it. Of course, I'm saying you in a jocular fashion. Your nervous system. I'm going to stop the tape so we can put on some stuff. But since I don't usually run trailers or give teasers for upcoming programs, I will say this. It is my general intention, perhaps next time we do this, to tell you some things that are going to be potentially very upsetting to some of you. So upsetting that some of you potentially will not hear it. Some of you will believe you hear some of it, and you're not going to like it at all. And of course, that's because it's getting closer and closer to something. But until then, cheer up. I know I will.